Okay, so we start with the Upanishads. We've done our 2 weeks of introduction. So hopefully you have a pretty good sense, or some kind of a sense, some kind of a bird's eye view, um, idea of um, of some of the expressions and issues and concerns and interactions in ancient India between the intellectual traditions. So, look, I feel like let's just dive straight into the Upanishads. We've had enough background context by now. Surely you will all know that the Upanishads are the fourth strata of the Vedic corpus and of interest to the Vedanta tradition. Okay, who are they're seeking the cause of reality, as any philosopher, theologian, or scientist is doing, and they're seeking to understand what the world is, and they're seeking to understand what the self is. Enough of all that. Let's now read the texts. We've had enough of sort of secondary introduction, filtered through Hamilton, filtered through me. Let's let the texts speak for themselves. And this is, of course, what I love to do personally. This is what I dedicated my life to. This is what nourishes me. So I'm very happy to share the rest of the course with you in terms of reading these texts. So, the very, very first verse of the Brihad is the Brihādaranyaka Upanishad. Okay, I'm just going to call it the Brihad, the great. Āranyaka means forest. So this is the oldest of the Upanishads. Now, when we say things like that, when scholars say this is older than that, or the Vedic texts are older than the Upanishads, why do we say that? Well, why do scholars say that? Remember, for the tradition, they're eternal texts. There's no chronology within the texts. There's no older and later, because they're all eternal divine revelation. When scholars say, of course, scholars, will see things differently, and for the most part, think, engage these texts as human products rather than divine revelation, and seek to contextualize them. So that's really what the academic study of religion is, and that's how it differs from, studying this in an ashram or in a traditional center in India, center of study of learning. But why do scholars say something like that? And basically, it's the language. I mean, if we take, let's say, the oldest form of English that we know, Beowulf, is actually Beowulf. So it's basically German. It's Anglo-Saxon. And then we compare it with Chaucer, old Chaucer, and then compare that again with Shakespeare. These are all sort of different chronologically later texts. And then we compare Shakespeare with, I don't know, Dickens, and then compare Dickens with Victorian English, and compare Victorian English with, present day English, some kind of English in, let's say, in the States, like say Bronx English or Southern English or Cockney English, or these various expressions of English. Clearly, there's a difference. We can't say the language is the same. So then we need to explain, well, why is the language why is it different? Well, of course, in the instances that I just articulated, well, we know that these are chronologically later texts. But we apply the same logic to ancient texts. If the Rig Vedic language is kind of like Beowulf to Shakespeare or Chaucer, or what to speak of, Dickens, it's a very different language. The Rig Vedic Sanskrit is archaic. It has certain forms that we don't see in later Sanskrit, certain grammatical features like subjunctive. Certain words are there which drop out. Right, words drop out, just like in Victorian English we had these and thous and thou this and that. We don't say that anymore. So that's how the language changes, and over the centuries it changes quite a lot. And therefore scholars feel they have grounds to, that's one of the grounds, and of course then the culture expressed in the texts changes over time, and the intellectual issues of concern expressed in philosophical texts change. We can see different texts engaging with different intellectual opponents and different intellectual viewpoints. So all of that is, from an academic point of view, reflects historical change. So that's what we mean when we say the Brihad is the oldest. Its language is archaic, still has sort of Vedic grammatical features, There isn't just a type of Sanskrit. Of course, in case of ancient India, Panini, the great grammarian, did kind of establish a sort of classical type of Sanskrit which was adhered to for many, many, many centuries. So that did have the effect of sort of stabilizing or making the classical language fixed. But nonetheless, clearly, there's other literature being composed around Sanskrit, like Pali and Prakrit and other forms. Pali, a lot of Buddhist texts are in Pali. Anyway, all of which is to say that this Brihad is from that point of view of linguistic analysis is the oldest text. And the only reason I put this in the very first one, so Brihad, great Aranyaka forest. So that points to the fact that there's people are going to the forest now to seek truths. They're moving away from sort of small town ancient India, moving away from the ritual culture, but the rituals are still being performed in the forest. Some of these, even the meditators, are doing their Vedic sacrifices, and they're also then meditating and pursuing higher truths. It's not like they were totally just jettisoned the Vedas and the Vedic. When I say the Vedas, I mean the rituals. Just applied themselves to the pursuit of intense meditations, but not all. Some of the Brahmins are keeping up their old practices while they engage in sort of ascetic, renunciatory type lifestyles. They're renouncing things, everything. But here we see already in the Brihad, and this is a feature of the earlier strata of text, the Brahmanas, this kind of like giving esoteric interpretations of the Vedic sacrifice. Instead of it just accepting it as, okay, there's fire, you throw things into the fire, or it gets transported to the gods. I mean, that's on face value what the sacrifice is, and clearly that's what it meant for most ancient Brahmanas. But you see then amongst the forest dwellers who are actually beginning to seek other kinds of truths, this application of symbolic meaning to the sacrifice. And I just want you to get a sense of that. It's not going to be part of our course, but that's why I put this here. So, for example, the head of the sacrificial horse, the horse was the Ashvamedha, is one of the main sacrifices, Vedic sacrifices, is the dawn. Okay, now you get all of a sudden you get these correlations. Its sight is the sun, its breath is the wind, its gaping mouth is the fire, common to all men. Now we don't necessarily understand what all this means, by the way. Scholars speculate, but a lot of this stuff. Look at the second verse. In the beginning there was nothing here at all. Death alone covered this completely, as did hunger. For what is hunger but death? Then death made up his mind. Let me equip myself with a body. Ātman, by the way, sometimes means a body. It means the self. But sometimes that self, in the philosophical traditions, it becomes the sort of innermost self, the sort of deep level self, the consciousness self. But sometimes it can refer to the body as well, or even the mind. In the Gita, sometimes the Ātman means the mind. And so then death. Okay, so he undertook a liturgical recitation, an ark, a hymn, a Vedic hymn. And as he was engaged in liturgical recitation, water sprang from him. And he thought, while I was engaged in liturgical recitation, ark, water sprang from me. This is what gave the name to and discloses the true nature of recitation. Okay, we're not going to read a lot of these kinds of passages in the Upanishads, but we need to know that there's a lot of them. They're archaic, they're ancient, we don't necessarily know what they mean. We're going to be focusing in those passages that are clearly dealing with the Ātman, clearly dealing with Brahman as the source of everything, more philosophical or proto-philosophical, mystical. But reason I put this on the syllabus, don't worry, it won't be on the quiz. I just want you to have a sense that a lot of the Upanishads is this kind of, obscure for us now, many millennia later, and obscure passages. We try to construe meaning from them. We're not necessarily successful now. Okay, we don't necessarily know what they mean. So there they are. So that's why I put those there. And then the next section that is on your syllabus is section 4. So we have lots of sort of narratives about in the beginning. And Vedanta will later revisit this and say, well, these are all references to Brahman. And maybe they're metaphoric, they may be put in these little story forms, but ultimately anything to do with the beginning for later Vedanta sutras and the whole of chapter 1, a lot of chapter 1 of the first of the 4 chapters of Vedanta Sutra is going to be actually looking at some of these obscure references, talking about in the beginning, talking about the source of all things or the foundation of all things, and arguing that these are really references to Brahman. But just to get a sense of some of these different kind of narratives. Again, the Upanishadic sages are not philosophers; they're mystics. They write in poetic language, sort of metaphoric, poetic, symbolic perhaps language, and we're just going to get a sense of it because the rest of the passages we're going to look at in the Upanishads are going to be much more focused on Ātman. Okay, so don't be worried about these kinds of passages. I'm not expecting you to remember them or be responsible for them, but I do want you to be aware that they're there, and they take up a lot of especially the two oldest Upanishads are the Brihad and the Chandogya. These are kind of the way the book is. Of course, you don't have the book; you only have selections. Okay, but out of the two from the Upanishads, because I just xeroxed the selections to save you buying the book. But the way the selections come from when you buy a book on the Upanishads, usually they're set up in a chronological order with the older ones first and the later ones later, okay? Based on the language and content. And as we get to the later ones, also they become more systematic, much more, we can connect them much more easily with later Hinduism. You can definitely see the roots of later Hinduism in the later Upanishads. But these early ones, and it's enormous. The Brihad is a big Upanishad. A lot of obscure material there. Okay, so here's another little example. In the beginning, this world was just a single body, again, Ātman, shaped like a man. He looked around and saw nothing but himself. The first thing he said was, "Here I am," and aham asmi, and from that, the name I, asmi, came into being. So you get these etymologies, these little stories about why words mean what they do. Kind of interesting. Therefore, even today, when you call someone, he first says, "It's I." And then he states whatever other name he may have. "It's I, Frankie." Of course, there wouldn't be any Frankies in ancient India, but you might have a Devadatta. Okay, so so I just picked out a couple of these for you to get a sense of this aspect of the Upanishads. And then the next thing I put on your reading list was 2.1, and let's go there. So we'll go to Adhyaya 2, which is the second section of the Brihadāraṇyaka. And here's a typical Upanishadic passage. You'll notice it's repetitive. A lot of these passages are repetitive. Why are they repetitive? And they have the sort of similar refrain at the end. Well, because it's oral. It's oral narration, so you're hearing it. You know, it's not like a book. You can read it, and then if you miss something, go back and read it again. You can't do that with oral exposition. So that's why if you're making an important point, you're going to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. Maybe just change some element of your repetition, so that the person goes away with a clear understanding of whatever it is that the teacher is trying to impart. So here's an example of that. So we're chapter 2, section 2. Verse 1, there was once a learned Gargi, which is a member of a particular lineage of Gargi, and his name was Balaki. He said to Ajata Shatru, which is a warrior name. It's very interesting. There's warriors in the forest. They're not all Brahmins. So Ajata Shatru, the king of Kashi. Kashi is the old name for Varanasi. So the kingdom goes back to this early Upanishad. So this learned Brahmana, so Gargi would be a Brahmana lineage, and he's talking to a Kshatriya. He says, "Let me tell you a formulation of truth. Let me tell you something about Brahman." Ajata Shatru replied, "We'll give you 1,000 cows," because the kings, of course, would just give charity, and if the Brahmins came and gave teachings, they didn't charge, but they expected to receive a donation. "We'll give you 1,000 cows for such a speech. People are sure to rush here crying, 'Here's a Janaka, here's a Janaka.'" Some scholars see this as a bit of he's being sarcastic. The king is being sarcastic. A Janaka means, nowadays we would say, "Oh, you're such an Einstein," meaning, "Oh, you're so smart, right? You're such an Einstein." So they read it that way. Here's this puffed up Brahmin, and he's saying, "Oh, I'll teach you something about Brahman," and then King says, okay, I'll give you a donation, and I'm sure everybody will come running thinking, oh, he's such an Einstein, he's such an Einstein, he's such a Janaka, such a Janaka. So Gargi then said, is the person up there in the sun that I venerate as Brahman? Ajatashatru replied. Notice how the king is dismissive and sarcastic. Don't start a discussion with me about him. I venerate him only as the most eminent of all beings, as their head and king. Anyone who venerates him this way will become the most eminent of all beings. He will become their head and king. He's basically saying, what's that got to do with Brahman? What are you teaching me? And this goes on, right? So the point is that what is Brahman? Well, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. Maybe that's one of the points. That's how perhaps a Vedantin would read it. So then it goes on like this for a number of verses. Gargi then said, it's the person up there in the moon that I venerate as Brahman. And then Ajatashatru likewise sort of rejects it. Don't start a discussion with me about him. I venerate him only as Soma, the great king dressed in white. And so it goes on. Gargi then said, is the person up there in lightning that I venerate? Okay, and you get the point. This is sort of oral exposition, right? You're sitting there listening to this. And and then and the teacher wants the point to be made, and you're listening, wondering where's the punchline. So that's going to help you remember this in an oral culture. So it goes on. Look all the way up to, right to the next 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Finally, 13. Then Gargi then said, it's the person here in the body that I venerate as Brahman. Verse 13, over the page. Ajatashatru replied, don't start a discussion with me about him. I venerate him only as the one possessing a body. Anyone who venerates him this way will come to possess a body, and so will his children. Thereupon Gargi fell silent. It's like he had nothing else to say. He's kind of been almost ridiculed by the king. Is that all? Asked Ajatashatru. Well, that's all. It isn't known with just that, says Ajatashatru. Let me come to you as your pupil, said Gargi. Now the Brahman's coming to the Kshatriya, the warrior. Brahman has gone to the warrior. It's interesting because some of these teachings are first come out of the mouth of the Brahmins, of the warrior caste in the Upanishads, including the teaching of reincarnation. And historians are going to understand that in various ways that I don't want to get into right now. Look, the next one. Ajatashatru replied, isn't it a reversal of the norm for a Brahmin to become the pupil of a Kshatriya, thinking he will tell me the formulation of truth? But I'll see to it that you perceive it clearly. So now the roles are flipped. Warrior king is now going to teach this upstart Brahmin who thought he was going to get some donation by coming into the court and saying, oh, I'll teach you something. Probably, hoping to get a donation. The king says, sure, I'll give you 1,000 cows. What do you got? And he wasn't very impressed with his formulations. Okay, so then it goes on. Now Ajatashatru teaching the king, and we're just going to hit on some of the high points. You're gonna, you should read everything yourself that was on the syllabus. Obviously, we can't read every single passage, but hopefully you get enough for you to be able to navigate these on your own. We'll go down to 20. So and now the king's going to speak about Brahman. The warrior king, a Kshatriya king, is the one that's going to be teaching a Brahmin. So that's for a historian, that's a very interesting, kind of early indication that maybe things in the early period were not what they came to be in the later period, where all knowledge was exclusively in the hands and preserved of the Brahmana caste. Why is it that the warrior's here? Of course, some scholars see it as, that remember that some scholars believe the Indo-Aryans came in from the outside and there was an existing culture. So some of these teachings already were percolating in the existing culture, and then they weren't reincarnation, for example, and some of the teachings of the Ātman were not in the Indo-European culture that came in. And then as they merged, these teachings start to surface that were not originally in the Vedic texts, but they become absorbed into the Vedic text from these pre-existing non-Indo-European cultures. And they might point to this as an example of that. But at this early point, the Brahmins didn't know anything about Brahman or reincarnation. Well, there's other passages where dealing with reincarnation are the same. I don't know if I subscribe to all of that, but that's what historians do. They try to puzzle these sorts of things out. So here we get then finally Ajatashatru, the warrior says, as a spider, verse 20, sends forth its thread, and as tiny sparks spring forth from a fire, a lot of metaphors in the Upanishads, so indeed do all the vital functions, prana, remember that word, prana, the life airs, uh, all the vital functions, the prana, all the worlds, right? Multiple worlds, celestial realms, all the gods, the little g, the devas, the ones that are recipients of the sacrifice that give you rain if you do your sacrifices properly, and all the other, all the goods, the boons of life. And all beings spring from this self. Notice how Ātman here, usually it's Brahman when we talk about the cosmic self from which everything springs. Normally the term Brahman is used, but I think we've mentioned this in past lectures. Sometimes the term Ātman is used, often it's used as synonymous with Brahman, although usually it tends to refer to the spark or the aspect of Brahman within the individual, and the term Brahman tends to be used for the cosmic Brahman, but they can be interchanged. And here's the example of Ātman being used in a cosmic sense. They all spring from this Ātman. It's hidden, its Upanishad is, he's translated Upanishad here as hidden name. Olivel does that. He wants the Upanishad to mean hidden connection, hidden name. I'm not sure everybody agrees with him. It doesn't matter. The traditional etymology of Upanishad is Upa, Ni, Shat. Upa is a prefix, Ni is another prefix, Shat. Come, down, sit. Come sit down. The teacher beckoning the student. Come sit down. Come sit down here. Come learn let me teach you about Brahman. Let me teach you about ultimate truth, right? You can imagine a Upanishadic sage. Student comes seeking higher knowledge. Upanishad. That's okay. So that would be how the tradition would see it. Oliver thinks of it as the hidden connection between things. So anyway, let me tell you, he says, it's the real behind the real. Okay, this world is real, right? If you're a realist, obviously. If you're a realist, the world is real. But what's the real behind the real? What is the cause? What is it that sustains the world? So it's the real behind the real. But the real consists of the vital functions, right? We're alive, we breathe, so that's real, and we think, but what's behind that? For the real consists of the vital functions, right? If someone dies, one of the things we do is check to see there's air coming out. So, okay, air and breathing and prana is a sign of life. Is there a higher reality beyond that? For this real consists of the vital function, and the self is the real behind the vital functions. The real behind the real. Okay, so that's that little typical little Upanishadic passage, repetitive. You get several verses, and then you get a grand finale conclusion that says something revelatory about Brahman. So we'll move along to the passage number 4. Still in section 2, passage number 4, and now we get a discussion between Yājñavalkya and his wife Maitreyi. So there were women. There were women in the forest. There's not many of them, but there's Maitreyi, there's Gargi. There's at least 2 women. I think there's 3. I think there's a third one somewhere. And they're out there, and Maitreyi especially sharp as a whip, and engages in debate with the men, and humbles the men with her knowledge and with her. So that's something worth noting. Even as most yoga, most Vedanta, certainly later forms, especially forest culture, asceticism, it tends to be male-dominated, or if not exclusively male. But here we have Maitreyi. So her husband is Yājñavalkya. And he once said, look, I'm about to depart from this place. So come, let me make a settlement between you and Katyayani. So he has 2 wives. Okay, nothing unusual in the pre-modern world, anywhere in the world. So Yājñavalkya, he's about to depart, and many commentators take this as being sannyas, the 4th stage of life. 4 stages of life. First 25 years, you're student, brahmacharya. Second stage of life, you're a householder, grihastha. The third phase of life, the husband and wife sort of start to ease out of family affairs, hand everything over to the kids, and they start being concerned about their spiritual destinies in the next life. So they start dedicating their time to spiritual pursuits, but together, vanaprastha. And the last 25 years, that would be, so 1 to 25 first, 25 to 50 second phase, householder, 50 to 75, husband and wife together, start to renounce, become celibate again, body's getting old anyway. And then the final 25 years, they separate, and the husband takes sannyas, and the wife too breaks. The idea is you break all attachments to this world before you die, because you still have desires, which will be a very strong theme that will reoccur. It's desires that cause us to come back, to be reborn. If you desire something, then and you die, and you still have the desire, well, you come back to fulfill a desire, right? Just like if I'm here and I have a desire for something somewhere else, then I go to that other place to fulfill my desire. So at the moment of death, I have desires, but I'm dying, so then I come back to fulfill the desires. Of course, there's karma. I mean, it's not quite as simple as that, but that's part of the story. So they separate because you don't want to die attached to your wife, because that's, if you have a big attachment's like an anchor that just keeps you, like a big ship can be just anchored, and it makes it immobile. So the desire binds us to this world. So obviously, that if you've been married for 50 years, right, 25 years active household life, and then another 25 years as partners, spiritual partners, right, the vanaprastha, well, that's, a big attachment. And if death catches you and you're attached like that, then that's a very, that could be a definite cause for returning into samsara, the cycle of birth and death, samsara. I'm going to be repeating a lot of these Sanskrit terms. Please don't get overwhelmed with the Sanskrit. Just, you've got your vocab list. You've already been provided one vocab list. So in terms of the quizzes, your minds can rest assured in terms of what you need to know. Let's just let me say the Sanskrit, and as long as you don't have to sort of, you'll know what you need to know for the quizzes. Other than that, just let it go through your mind. You'll remember some terms, a lot of repetition, you'll get to remember them. Other terms, I'm just going to say them, just let them come and go. And why am I doing this? Because we want to get as close to the text as we can. Obviously, it's already filtered by translation, so we can't help that. We can't teach in Sanskrit, but let's at least use as many terms as we can. Flavor our discussion with Sanskrit terms, just so that out of respect for the tradition, and try and keep connected as close as we can, given it's an undergraduate course, Introduction to Hindu Philosophy. Okay, so but don't worry, you have your vocab list, so you don't need to freak out. So now he's about to depart, and so most commentators take that to mean sannyasa, or some do anyway. He's going to enter the fourth stage, where the husband renounces the wife. The women then go back to the household, but they're not supposed to become involved in household affairs. They too have to try to fix their mind on Ātman and Brahman and God and Ishvara, depending on whatever traditions they're following at the end of life. Okay, but the husband goes to the forest. Why the forest? Because to break all attachments. So that's the ideal. Of course, don't think everybody actually followed that, but that's the ideal. But a lot of people did. The earliest accounts that we have of ancient India, the Greeks and the early Buddhists, and everybody talks about the Indian ascetics, A-S-C-E-T-I. It's not with a T-A, not aesthetics as in art and stuff, but asceticism, which means renunciation and austerity. And even today, there's a subculture of wandering ascetics who own nothing but their loincloth and a pot. And millions. There's no way of counting them. They don't go and sign. They don't. They don't. They're not part of the population count. You're not going to have them. You're not going to find them signing forms like how many people in your household. They don't have a household. They're wandering around in a loincloth. So there's no way of knowing how many there are. But there's still tens of millions. One might say, or certainly a large number. You see them all over India. Might be millions. So off he's going. So now Maitreyi says, so let me make a settlement between you and Katyayani. He's saying, let me, give you all the material effects so that you'll be protected and safe. I'll split up, divide whatever I have between you so that you'll be able to spend your rest of your life in security and safety. All right, so he wants to take care of it. He's not just going to dump them and walk off in the forest. He's going to make sure that they're accounted, that they're, that they have, they have security and peaceful minds. Now look at Maitreyi. She asked in reply, "If I were to possess the entire world filled with wealth, sir, would it make me immortal?" No, said Yājñavalkya, "it will only permit you to live the life of a wealthy person. Through wealth one cannot expect immortality. Well, what is the point of getting me something that will not make me immortal?" retorted Maitreyi. "Tell me instead, sir, all you know." How about that? He wants to give her money to keep her, safe for the rest of her life. And she says, what's the point of that? I'm going to die. Is that going to make me immortal? Am I going to attain immortality? Am I going to attain liberation if you give me money and whatever? Oh, and he says, no. And he says, well, then it's useless then, isn't it? Give me knowledge. So here, clear example of women not just actively engaged in the pursuit of knowledge, but keenly interested. Of course, the knowledge is coming from a male. I mean, I'm not saying, it's still the male that is in possession of the sources of knowledge, but and that's fair enough. So let's make sure we note that. But as it is anywhere in the world, of course, arguably, it has been in European history. I think about philosophy and science as almost, until recently, and still women are not adequately represented in the fields of, there's still sort of, there's still barriers in some ways, social barriers or psychological barriers. I don't know, but certainly in the history of European science and philosophy, it's been practically exclusively male preserved. So this is not something exclusive to, the point I'm making is not something exclusive to ancient India, right? But clearly here, but the point here, another point here is that the women were certainly not excluded. So he says, so then tell me instead, sir, all that you know, okay? And then Yājñavalkya said in reply, "You have always been very dear to me, and now you speak something very dear to me. Come and sit down. I will explain it to you. But while I am explaining, try to concentrate." That's a little bit of a what does he mean by that? So have fun with these. Have fun with the Upanishads. There is, I mean, there's gravitas here. There's seriousness. There's weighty subject matter, but there's also wit. There's also sort of, like we saw with the king, right? So he's kind of being a little sarcastic. So maybe we're reading this, we're projecting we're projecting into the text, but nonetheless. Okay, so then he goes, he starts giving her wisdom. One holds a husband dear, you see, not out of love for the husband, rather it is out of love for oneself. Ātman, that one holds a husband dear. Why do we, we have our partners. Why do we hold them dear? Really, because he's saying, you can see whether you agree or not, it's because they give the self something, right? What does the husband or what does your partner give you? Companionship, sex, whatever it might be. So security, but it's the you that you love. And because we love ourselves ultimately, then we engage in these other relationships. We have children. He's going to go on to say, because we believe or we feel that they give ourself, happiness and satisfaction. Okay? And he goes on. Again, repetition. Notice the repetition. All you do is change one part, but you're repeating the teaching. Change one ingredient in it to make it sound different. Keep the mind actively connected. One holds a wife dear, not out of love for the wife, rather is out of love for oneself that one holds a wife dear. And he goes on, one holds children dear, not out of love for the children, rather it is out of love for oneself. And then he goes on, one holds wealth dear, one da-da-da-da-da-da, and he goes on and on and on. And so then let's just jump now, and we'll go to right above, at the end of 5, verse 5, over the page. By the way, I'm using the larger version, so it may be the case that my page numbers don't quite match up with you because I have the Sanskrit on one side and the English on the other. So in case I need to check the Sanskrit, I'm going to use this. So sometimes I may give you a page number, and I don't know if it'll always be the same. But anyway, on my page 69, but it's right at the end of verse 5, so we're in 2, 4, 5, second section, part 4, part 5. So sometimes there's 3 numbers. So Brihadaranaka, second section, or chapter if you want. It's not really a chapter of, but anyway, 2, 4, 5. You see, Maitreyi, it is oneself that one should see and hear. He's saying, look, all these other things we do, it's because of the self. because we're trying to seek happiness for the self. So really, it's the self that we're trying to seek indirectly through our connection with all these other things. It's really the self that is urging us, impelling us to seek happiness out there through these relationships. Later on, many texts are going to say that all these relationships, their problem is they're impermanent. You can't hang on to your husband and your wealth and your kids, so therefore it's useless. Seek the self within, and not these temporary things which we seek anyway, because we somehow think they will give pleasure to the self, but often they give us more suffering than they do pleasure. But that'll be a big theme later on. We'll wait till we get there. But right now, the Upanishads, many of the Upanishads are just establishing the existence of the self in these various ways. So you see, Maitreya, it is oneself that one should see and hear. The Ātman, by the way, the term for self is Ātman here. He has it in brackets. It's one Ātman that one should see and hear, and on which one should reflect and concentrate. This is what we should be seeking. For by seeing and hearing oneself, and by reflecting and concentrating on oneself, one gains the knowledge of the whole world. One gains knowledge of everything, because Ātman is somehow connected with Brahman, and Brahman sustains the whole world. And we're seeking these other things because we think that they're giving pleasure to the self. Well, how about we seek the self then, rather than these ephemeral things out there, which are like fallible soldiers. Fallible means they could fall at any time. Okay, so that's a nice little teaching there. I apologize. It may be the case that the Maitreya passage in Yājñavalkya is not in the selections, in which case that's fine, don't worry. Hopefully it was intelligible. So let's go to chapter 3 or section 3 of the Brihad, and I think it's 4 to 9 that I put on the syllabus. Let's just jump in the middle 6, so that would be 3, section 3.6. And again, just to give you a sense of how the Upanishads are, this repetition of sort of eliminating things that are irrelevant, and then finally getting down to Brahman as the real kind of truth that we seek. So, for example, 6. Then Gargi. So there was another lady here. Vācaknavi. So that means she has good speech. She's a speaker, right? She's not sitting there. That's what the meaning of the word Vācaknavi means. Somehow she's connected, associated with speech and speaking in a learned sort of way. And Gargi, so she began to question him, right? Brahmin name, she's also Brahmin. Yājñavalkya, right? So that's that's a Brahmin name, because Yajna means a Vedic sacrifice. So anyone who has a name that's, that's associated with Brahmin lineages, or some name that has something to do with the Vedic rituals, it's Brahmin. And warriors have names like a Jatashatru we had before, one whose enemy has not been born. Right? He's so powerful that no one can confront him in the battlefield. So no one can confront him essentially. So you can tell from the name, if you translate them, what caste one is in. So she said, "Tell me, since this whole world is woven back and forth on water." Right, so now his second wife is asking Yajñavalkya, well, what is water woven back and forth? On air, Gargi. And what then is air woven back and forth? On the worlds of the intermediate region, Gargi, right, various celestial realms. On what then are the... And it goes on like this, through, 10 or 11 levels, right? I mean, we know where it's going to end up, right? It's going to end up with Brahman. And what are the worlds that go to the end now of that sequence? And what then are the worlds of Prajapati woven back and forth? On the worlds of Brahman, Gargi, right? So that's a full stop, right? Brahman is the cause. but here again, you've got a female kind of challenging this big. Yajñavalkya is a big pundit, a big sort of sage of the Upanishads. He's a famous Brahmin, well known. So she says to him, well, what's Brahman, right? Like saying, well, the God. Who is the creator? God. Well, who creates God? Right? There's obviously no answer to that. God is God. So then she says, on the worlds of Brahman, Gargi. And that is an argument, by the way, we see in later Hindu philosophy, right? But if you want to say God is the creator, what right do you have to say God is the creator? If you say everything has a creator and you say God is the creator, well, then by that logic, then who creates God then? So that might be an argument. That is an argument that surfaces later, but here we see an early form of that. So on what then are the worlds of Brahman woven back and forth? At this point, Yājñavalkya told her, don't ask too many questions, Gargi, or your head will shatter apart. You're asking too many questions about a deity about whom one should not ask too many questions. So Gargi, don't ask too many questions. So Yajñavalkya is coming across a little bit of a fanatic here. He's been challenged and, doesn't look like he has a good answer to that one, so he just tells it it's a common refrain, by the way. Your head will shatter apart. We see that used a lot. We're not, obviously scholars speculate as to what exactly does that mean. It's a bit like, in the 60s, we would say, your mind was blowing your mind. Of course, that was in a sort of drug culture in a different context. But, that's a phrase. You can imagine in 1,000 years when that culture's lost and people dig up some text from the psychedelic culture of the 60s and they read the phrase, your mind was blown, and they have to think, what the heck does that mean? So we have a statement here. Don't ask too many questions. Your head will shatter. It's often, you see it many times in the Upanishads. If you do this, your head will shatter. So it's some kind of a, we can speculate, but it's some kind of a, when someone doesn't like the questions going in a direction that's uncomfortable for the person giving the answers, might say something like that. Okay, so that's that one. We can't read everything, and I don't want these lectures to be too long and onerous for you. So we'll jump now to, and we have to do the Chandogya still. There's a lot of good stuff in the Chandogya. We'll go along to 4.43 in my page 121. Yours may be somewhere around there. I don't know. And here we have one of the earliest references to reincarnation. There's no mention of reincarnation in the old Vedas, in the older texts. We find it in the Upanishads, the first clear reference. And here's one of those, maybe the first. Okay, so we're on bit 4. Let me just see what the page numbers are. Okay, my page numbers are completely different from yours, and that makes sense because half of mine is going to be Sanskrit, so I'm going to be double ahead of you because for every 2 pages of mine is only going to be 1 page of yours. So, first reference to reincarnation. And this is so cool. You see how, this is not being presented in a philosophical sort of way as later Nyaya and the logicians are going to present reincarnation and the Buddhists. But in a sort of metaphoric way, just explaining how it works. Look, it is like this. As a caterpillar, okay, so we're 4, Brihadaraniyaka, 4, and verse number 3. Okay, so the verse numbers are in small little print, tiny print next to the text. And then you can look at the top of the page also to hunt down the page numbers. So mine has 448 at the top because it ends in verse 8. So 443, top of my page. Not yours is different. It is like this. As a caterpillar, when it comes to the tip of a blade of grass, reaches out to a new foothold and draws itself onto it, so the self, after it has knocked down this body and rendered it unconscious, reaches out to a new foothold and draws itself onto it. So imagine it. So isn't that beautiful? You can see, imagine the teacher sitting under a tree somewhere in the forest, a few students sitting at the feet. He's saying, look, think of a caterpillar. Here is a caterpillar, right, going along like this. It gets to the edge of the leaf. What does it do? It reaches out onto the next leaf and pulls itself over. So that's what happens to the Ātman. It leaves one body and it goes to the other body. Nice little metaphor. Or here's another metaphor. It is like this. As a weaver, after she has removed the colored yarn, weaves a different design that is newer and more attractive. So the self, and notice the refrain is the same. This bit is the same as the previous verse, and it will be the same as the next verse. The refrain is the same. That's the message you want to impart. The listener, right, listening. But you want to keep it interesting, so you change the first bit. You change the sort of metaphor a little bit, but then the teaching, as we might call a refrain, is the same. So the self, after it has knocked down this body and rendered it unconscious, meaning died, makes for himself, or itself, a different figure that is newer and more attractive. The figure of a forefather, or a Gandharva, or a god, or a Prajapati, or a Brahman, or else the figure of some other being, right? So a weaver's knitting away, okay, and then finishes something, and then, then pulled it all apart and knit something else. So the self leaves this body and enters into another body, right? Whatever it might be. A forefather or an ancestor or a Gandharva is a celestial being, or a god, not the celestial being. Gandharva is a particular type of god, or Prajapati, another celestial being. Okay? So those two are, but let's jump a little bit to the next one, 5. Let's go to the next one, but let's go down a bit. Halfway through 5, right in the middle. What a man turns out to be, what's the next body going to be? What a man or a woman turns out to be depends on how he or she acts, on how he or she conducts himself or herself. If his actions are good, he will turn into something good. If his actions are bad, he will turn into something bad. This is karma, right? According to our actions, that's going to translate into the nature of the next body. Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras later on in the semester is going to say, you know, your jati ayurboga, the birth that you get, te hlada paritapa punya punya hetutvat, that birth, the jati, is going to be good or bad, you know, happiness bearing, literally, or distress bearing. It's going to be just a happy birth or a distressful birth, punya hetutvat, depending on whether you do pious or impious activities. So karma is equal and opposite, right? You know, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Where as we act, in that sense, it's cause and effect. Like inanimate cause and effect, like any kind of a cause and effect, right? The force is equal and opposite. So therefore, it's not whimsical. It's not random. It's commensurate with the effect is commensurate with the cause. So there it is. So let's have a look. So if his actions are good, he will turn into something good. If his actions are bad, he will turn into something bad. A man turns into something good by good action, into something bad by bad action, and so people say. A person here consists simply of desire, because according to desire you act, and then your acts are good or bad, right, depending on the nature of your desire. So in that sense, it's really behind action is desire. We can say, okay, your action is good or bad, but where does action come from? Desire. So, and then here's a little sequence. A person here consists of desire. Note this is going to be a huge theme in this course, that desire is the cause of bondage. So a man resolves in accordance with the desire, acts in accordance with his resolve, and turns out to be in accordance with his action. On this point, right, so you resolve, you make a decision, right? First there's desire, and then you make a resolution, okay, I'm going to fulfill this desire, that's a resolve, and then you act. And then the reaction comes back. So that's how you turn out to be. You know, why do things happen to us? You know, why do things turn out the way they do? Because they're fruits of our initial action. So a man resolves in accordance with desire, acts in accordance with the resolve, and turns out to be in future birth in accordance with his action. Right? Don't blame anybody else. It's our action that creates our fruit. And then he has this. Notice the Upanishads contain these older verses. So look, on this point, there is the following verse. We don't know where it comes from some earlier source. We don't have any record of it other than the fact that the Upanishads are quoting these earlier sources. A man who's attached goes with his action to the very place to which his mind and character cling. Now, there's two principles in reincarnation. One is the nature of your action produces a corresponding effect, equal and opposite. The other is what your mind clings to at the moment of death, you turn out to be. That's what you turn out to be. The Gita presents that model, right? Antikale, no, there's a verse. Yam yam vapi smaram bhavam tyajate antikale varam tam tamevi tarojana. Whatever you think of the moment of death, yam yam vapi smaram bhavam tyajate antikale. When you're giving up the body, tam tamevi taro. That's the destination you will attain. So, a man. Okay, so therefore. So there's two principles. There's karma, the nature of your action creates good and bad, but that is also enmeshed, or there's a second principle. They're not exclusive. There's two principles involved in reincarnation. What you're thinking of as a moment of death, but it's also flavored by it's also because the moment of death we're going to be thinking of the things we're most attached to. We know that we're actually dying. We're going to be thinking, but what about my beloved this, or what about I didn't finish building my house, or whatever it is that we're most attached to, that's going to surface in the mind of the dying person, because they're leaving that thing behind. So that, but then it's not just that; it's also the nature of the total accumulation of one's actions in the course of the life. So that also then feeds into the mind set at the moment of death, and those two principles then translate into one's next birth. Could be an animal, could be anything. So therefore, a man who's attached goes with his action to that very place to which his mind and character cling. Whatever we cling to, we're going to cling to. We're going to be reborn in something that corresponds to that, obviously flavored by karma. Okay, reaching the end of his action of whatever he has done in this world, from that world he returns back to this world, back to action. So we take birth, and if you got to, let's say you get to the celestial realm, you still come back. So wherever you end up going, we end up coming back eventually to the human form. Now this, of course, is the course of a man who desires, and here we get one of the earliest teachings, pointing to the need to give up desire if we want to be free from reincarnation. Okay, and here it is. So that's the course of a man who desires. What about someone who doesn't desire? Now, a man who does not desire, or woman, who is without desires, right? The whole goal of all of the yoga traditions, Nyaya, Buddhism, Vedanta, is to give up desires. It's desires that cause us suffering, that cause us to have to return to this world. It's desires that are the anchor, that are the chain, the bond that chain us to this world. And of course, when we fulfill the desire, we just create more karma. So, now, that's the course of a man who desires. Now, a man who does not desire, right? We're a yogi or a sage, who is without desires, who is freed from desires, whose desires are fulfilled, whose desire is his self. You're allowed to desire the self, but not the things of this world, not body-mind things. You have to desire the self. Why would you seek the self unless you desire it? That's a good desire. His vital functions do not depart. Brahman he is, and to Brahman he goes. On this point there is the following verse, again an old verse. When they are all banished, those desires lurking in one's heart, then a mortal becomes immortal and attains Brahman in this world. So we'll see in the later traditions that liberation is something that not just you experience at death, but you can attain it in this world. Okay, so hope you enjoyed that passage. So we'll move along to verse number 22 in the same Brihad 4.4, but now verse 22. And here's a nice little passage. This immense, unborn self, right, Brahman, is none other than the one consisting of perception, or consciousness. That is what Brahman is. It's consciousness. It's eternal consciousness in some way. Of course, that gets modified and tweaked in the different schools. But all agree that Brahman is eternal, Sat, and it is conscious, Chit, and it is blissful, Ananda. These are the three qualities of Brahman agreed upon by all Vedanta traditions. Then from there, they take that in. For some, it's a person, supreme person, not made of matter, God, pure conscious being. For others, it's impersonal. We've touched upon that, and we'll be speaking a lot more about that. But this immense unborn self is none other than the one consisting of perception here among the vital functions, the prana, remember the life hairs. Right? That's awareness. That's among the vital functions. It's not the life hair. It's the one behind, sustains the life hairs. There, in that space within the heart, you'll notice that where is this Ātman located? What's the source of consciousness in the body? If there is an Ātman, where is it located? Because of the Upanishads, then the Vedanta subscribes to the view that its actual location is in the heart, it's in the heart where the organ of the heart is. And from there, its quality of consciousness pervades the whole body. Okay, so you'll notice a lot of talk about the heart. Keep that in mind. So there, in that space within the heart, he lies, the controller of all, right? The consciousness is controlling everything. If we lose consciousness in our hand, we can't use our hand anymore. So to be able to, for the body to be able to do anything, consciousness has to pervade it. So, he, the controller of all, the lord of all, the ruler of all, he does not become more by good actions or in any way less by bad actions. The Ātman is pure. It's not good or bad. It's the mind that is good or bad and creates uh, results that translates into a next body. The body may be good or bad. The mind may be good or bad, but the soul is pure consciousness. So he doesn't. He's going to be conscious whether it's a good birth or a bad birth. Consciousness is going to be consciousness within anything that's alive. The consciousness is the same consciousness. Now, what it's conscious of, the body it's in and the mind it's in, that body and mind may be locations of suffering or happiness, depending on karma. But karma is created by the mind. Keep that, we'll be returning to that point. He is the Lord of all. He is the ruler of creatures. He is the guardian of creatures. He is the dike separating these worlds, the dike, the bank, the world of matter and the world of pure soul. So they would not mingle with each other. It is he that Brahmins seek to know by means of Vedic recitation. So it's kind of a little dig at the Vedic thing, all these Vedic recitations. What's really behind it all? What are they really seeking? The ultimate truth, Brahman. It is he that Brahmins, we just said that, seek to know by means of Vedic recitation, by sacrifice, by gift giving, by austerity and fasting. These are some of the principles that purify the mind. And that really, what the real Brahmins, the ones that really seek Brahman, they are actually seeking, they're seeking Brahman, they're seeking the Ātman. It is he on knowing whom a man becomes a sage, not just a ritualist, but a sage, a person who knows, a wise person. It is when they desire him as their world that wandering ascetics undertake the ascetic life of wandering. I'm going to be using this term ascetic, so there it is spelled for you. Asceticism. All right, don't get it confused with aesthetics with a th, which means art and stuff like that. Okay. Why do people wander? Why do people leave, give up all their desires, and wander around in a loincloth with dreadlocks? Because they're seeking something greater than that, something eternal, not something ephemeral, that's ultimately going to be taken away at death, if it doesn't get taken away before. So that's the Ātman. Why do people just give up? Renounce the world? They're not fools or crazy. They're seeking something. They're seeking something greater. So what is that? It's Brahman. It's the Ātman. It is he. It is when they desire him instead of some petty, trivial. Oh, I want a husband. I want a wife. I want a nice house. I want a bank account. Right? These trivial, petty things which don't last. Okay, and don't give satisfaction. Now we'll be returning to that point. Is when they desire him, the Ātman. Brahman is their world that wandering ascetics undertake the ascetic life of wandering. Notice how the Yājñavalkya Maitreya discussion is repeated in the next section, 5. Okay, just pay attention. Sometimes these narratives are repeated, maybe some small differences. These Upanishads passages get repeated, again, so that we can remember them. And we'll end with in the 6th, I've given you section 6. Inside that, part 2. And we'll move along to verse 6. So that will be 6 to 6, or rather, 6 to 7. Again, just quickly, notice here again we have a Brahmana approaching a Kshatriya, a warrior. Brahmanas are supposed to be the ritualists, but also those that preserve Sanskrit knowledge. They're approaching a warrior. Again, some of this knowledge of reincarnation seems to, at least in the Upanishads, at least in this story, seems to have been in the possession of the warrior caste. And again, that's not of much interest to a philosopher. It's of great interest to a historian. This is not a course on history, but just so that you might find that interesting. And let's just have a quick read. And if you go down in verse 6, right before section 7, right before 8, so somewhere in the middle of 7, then Gautama, Brahmin, then Gautama, you will have to request it in the correct manner. The warrior says, and his name is Pravahana Jayavali, and there, you'll be reading the whole story, but we're running out of time. I want to keep this under an hour if I can. And I come to you, my lord, as a pupil, the Brahmin says to the warrior. With just these words, pay attention to this. Did the people of old um, place themselves as pupils under a teacher? They'd say, Arjuna does to Krishna in the Gita, Shishashteham Shadimam Tvam Prapanam. I'm your student, teach me, right? They were polite back then to their teachers. They came with a branjalier, hands folded in a nice, polite frame of mind. So, with just these words, right? I come to you, my Lord, as a pupil. Okay, you remember that? Next time you take a class with a teacher, say to the teacher, "I come to you, my Lord, as a pupil." See what he or she says. You can do it to me. Because I'll know where it comes from. All right. With just these words, the people of old placed themselves as pupils under a teacher. That's what they said. That was the sort of what they would say in order to establish the relationship. I'm coming to you. You have knowledge. I seek knowledge. Whatever knowledge you have, I come to you as a pupil. And the teacher, if is a real teacher, will always give knowledge. That's the dharma of the teacher, to give knowledge, and not for a fee. The student has to give a donation. That's the dharma of the student. But the teacher can't say, okay, you can't. It's not a fixed price. Whatever the student gives. If the student's poor, then he gives, some firewood or something. But no one is denied. So, although some of the knowledge systems, of course, were retained in Brahminical lineages, but let's not get into things of interest to the historians. And what's the point here? Okay. With just these words. So, did the people of old place themselves as pupils under a teacher, and Gautama lived there openly as a pupil? Jayavali then told him, here's the point. As before now, this knowledge has not resided in any Brahman. And this is knowledge of, it's going to be, if you read when you read the rest of the passage, you'll notice that you'll see that it's a knowledge of reincarnation. And he's saying here, Brahmins didn't have this knowledge. The Kshatriyas had it. So this is a puzzle for historians. What does this mean? Because all this knowledge is in the hands of Brahmins after this. But this passage, at least this verse says, this knowledge wasn't in their hands. Now, is it being rhetorical? Is it making a dramatic point? We can only speculate. Okay. So, okay, that's it. And I think I'll do the Chandogya in a different lecture. Let's keep it distinct. And I'm going to record now the second lecture for this. We're a little bit behind, but let's just do a good job. And okay, I'm going to record the Chandogya now.